The sound of a distant coyote's howl drifted across the vast Montana prairie as Abigail Rose stared at the horizon, her arms wrapped around herself instead of the child she had dreamed of holding. The late summer sun of 1876 cast long shadows across the weathered porch boards, turning the landscape golden as tears silently streaked her cheeks. 3 years had passed since she and her husband had built this homestead with dreams as wide as the western sky, but the family they'd planned remained just that, a dream. Abigail had lost the baby 4 months ago. It hadn't been her first loss, but this one had been the hardest to bear. The little boy had nearly made it to term before the bleeding started. The midwife had done everything she could, but by the time the sun rose the next morning, Abigail's arms were empty, and a small pine box was being lowered into the earth behind their cabin. Her husband, Adam Turner, had dug the grave himself, his normally steady hands blistered and bleeding by the time he finished. It was the third small grave he'd dug in as many years. Each time, he'd held her through the night as she wept, promising her that someday they would hold a healthy child of their own. But Abigail was beginning to lose faith in those promises. She heard the creak of the gate and looked up to see Adam returning from town, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun, Stetson pulled low over his eyes. He moved with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle, first as a cowhand and now working their own modest spread. Dust clung to his denim pants and cotton shirt, evidence of the long ride to Pine Ridge and back. Abigail quickly wiped away her tears, not wanting him to see her sorrow yet again. She'd promised herself she would be stronger for both their sakes. "Evening," he called, leading his horse toward the small stable. "Be back in a minute," she nodded, watching as he disappeared into the stable with his chestnut gelding. Adam had been in town picking up supplies and checking if there had been any mail. Abigail knew he was also likely checking in with Doc Wilson, though he'd never admit to it. They'd both been wondering if there was something wrong with her, something that kept their children from taking their first breaths in this world. When Adam emerged from the stable, he climbed the porch steps and settled beside her on the bench he'd crafted from pine the first summer they'd arrived. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the distant mountains. "Doc Wilson says hello," Adam finally said, confirming her suspicions. "Asked after you." "And what did you tell him?" Abigail asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam reached for her hand, his calloused palm rough against her skin. "I told him you're the strongest woman I've ever known." Fresh tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "I don't feel strong, Adam, I feel broken." He turned to her then, the lines around his blue eyes deepening. "Abby, look at me." She reluctantly raised her gaze to meet his. "I still see the family we dreamed of," he said firmly, his voice catching slightly. "This isn't the end of that dream, just a hard part of the journey." "It might be impossible," she whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. "Maybe I just can't carry a child to term. Maybe I'm not meant to be a mother." Adam shook his head, the stubborn set of his jaw so familiar it made her heart ache. "I don't believe that, and neither do you, not really. 4 losses, Adam, 4 tiny graves, how many more can we bear?" He had no answer for that, and they lapsed into silence as darkness settled around them. The lantern hanging from the porch hook cast a warm glow over them, and from inside the cabin, Abigail could hear the ticking of the clock her father had given them as a wedding present. "I got a letter today," Adam said finally. "From my brother in Denver." Abigail turned to him, surprised. Adam rarely heard from his younger brother Andrew, who had headed to Denver to seek his fortune in the silver mines 2 years earlier. "Is he well?" Adam nodded. "Seems to be. He's working as a clerk for a mining company now. Says it's easier on the back than digging silver." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. He mentioned something else. "There's an orphanage in Denver that's overflowing with children. Mining accidents, illness, folks who came west with big dreams but couldn't make it." Abigail's heart began to beat faster, understanding immediately what Adam was suggesting. "You think we should take in an orphan?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I think there are children out there who need a home, and we have a home that needs children," he replied simply. Maybe God's plan for our family looks different than we thought. Abigail stared out at the darkened prairie, considering his words. The idea of raising a child not born of her body had never occurred to her before. Her own mother had given birth to 7 children, raising 6 to adulthood. Abigail had always assumed she would do the same. "I don't know, Adam," she said honestly. "I need to think about it." He nodded, squeezing her hand. "Of course, there's no rush to decide. I just wanted you to know there are other paths we might take." That night, as they lay in bed together, Adam's arm draped protectively across her waist, Abigail stared at the ceiling, thinking about children without parents and parents without children. It seemed such a cruel twist of fate that these two sorrows existed simultaneously in the world. "Would you love a child that wasn't ours by blood?" she whispered into the darkness, unsure if Adam was still awake. "Any child in our home would be ours," he replied without hesitation, his voice clear. "Blood or not." She turned to face him, able to make out the outline of his features in the faint moonlight streaming through the window. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I can't love someone else's child the way I would have loved our own?" Adam reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Abby, your heart has more love in it than anyone I've ever known. That's why it hurts so much when we lose a baby. But that love doesn't disappear, it's still there, waiting." Abigail considered his words, feeling a tiny spark of hope ignite within her for the first time in months. "How would we even begin such a journey? Denver is 100 miles away." "We'd figure it out," Adam said with the quiet confidence that had first drawn her to him when they'd met at a church social back in Missouri 6 years ago. "We've faced harder challenges." That was true enough. They'd traveled over 1,000 miles to stake their claim in Montana territory, built their cabin with their own hands, survived blizzards and drought and the loneliness that sometimes settled over the prairie like a physical weight. "Let me sleep on it," she said finally. "We can talk more tomorrow." But sleep proved elusive as Abigail's mind filled with images of unknown children with unknown faces. Would a child who hadn't grown beneath her heart still feel like her own? Could she be a mother to a child who might remember another woman's touch, another woman's voice singing lullabies? The next morning, Abigail rose early and stepped outside to watch the sunrise. The air was crisp with early autumn, the tall grass rippling in the breeze like waves on a golden sea. She walked to the small, fenced area behind the cabin where 4 tiny crosses stood in a row. She knelt beside them, tracing her fingers over the names carved into the wood: Elizabeth, Samuel, James, and Michael. Children who had existed only briefly but who had forever changed her heart. "I'll always be your mother," she whispered. "Nothing can ever change that." When she returned to the cabin, Adam was awake and building up the fire in the cast iron stove. He looked up as she entered, his expression questioning but patient. "I think we should write to the orphanage," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "At least find out more about the children there, what the process might be." Adam's face broke into a smile that reminded her of why she'd fallen in love with him, that unguarded joy that transformed his normally serious features. "I'll write to Andrew today," he said. "He can make inquiries for us." Over the next few weeks, as autumn deepened around them, Abigail and Adam continued their daily routines of tending the livestock, preserving food for winter, and preparing the homestead for the coming cold. But there was a new energy between them, a sense of purpose that had been missing since their last loss. Andrew's reply arrived in late September, carried by the mail coach that passed through Pine Ridge once a week. Adam read the letter aloud to Abigail as they sat by the fire that evening. "The orphanage is called St. Mary's Home for Children," he read. "It's run by the Sisters of Charity." Andrew spoke with the Mother Superior, who says they currently have 28 children ranging from infants to 12 years of age. Many are siblings who lost their parents to typhoid last winter. Abigail's breath caught at the mention of siblings. "They keep families together." Adam nodded, continuing to read. "They try to, though Andrew says most folks who come looking to take in a child want babies or very young children. The older ones, especially boys over 8 or so, rarely find homes. Abigail thought of her own brothers and how close they had been growing up. The idea of siblings being separated seemed unbearably sad. "What's the process?" she asked. "For taking in a child," Adam scanned the letter. "Andrew says the sisters require a letter of recommendation from our local minister or other respected community member, proof that we can provide for a child. And ideally, a personal meeting before they would consider placing a child with us." Abigail bit her lip, thinking of the long journey to Denver. "Winter will be here soon. We couldn't travel until spring." "No," Adam agreed, "but we could begin the process, get the letter from Reverend Porter, perhaps exchange letters with the sisters through the winter months. Then, when the passes clear in the spring, we could make the journey." The idea both terrified and excited Abigail. A journey to Denver would be the farthest she'd traveled since coming west. And at the end of that journey might be the child or children who would finally fill their home with the family they'd dreamed of. "Let's do it," she said, her decision made. The following Sunday, after church services in Pine Ridge, Abigail and Adam approached Reverend Porter with their request. The elderly minister had been with them through each of their losses, praying over the tiny graves and offering what comfort he could. "I think it's a wonderful idea," he said warmly, his roomy eyes brightening. "I'd be honored to write a letter on your behalf. You two would make fine parents to any child fortunate enough to find a home with you." His words brought tears to Abigail's eyes. "Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you know." As they walked back toward their wagon, Abigail noticed several of the townswomen watching them, whispering behind gloved hands. She'd grown accustomed to being an object of pity and speculation in the small community, but it still stung. "Don't mind them," Adam murmured, guiding her past the women with a hand at the small of her back. "People will always talk." "I know," Abigail sighed. "I just wish they'd find something more interesting to discuss than our personal sorrows." "They will soon enough," Adam replied with a hint of mischief in his voice. "Just wait until we return from Denver with a child. That will give them something new to chatter about." The thought made Abigail smile despite herself. She could just imagine the reaction when they returned with a child, or perhaps even more than one. The notion that had seemed so foreign just weeks ago was taking shape in her mind and heart, becoming a real possibility rather than just a vague idea. That evening, Adam penned a careful letter to the Mother Superior at St. Mary's, explaining their situation and their interest in providing a home for a child in need. Abigail added a few lines of her own, finding it difficult to express in words why she should be entrusted with someone else's child when her body had rejected her own. In the end, she wrote simply, "We have a home filled with love waiting for a child who needs it. We cannot promise perfection, but we can promise patience, kindness, and a steadfast commitment to any child who becomes part of our family." They sent the letter off with Reverend Porter's recommendation the following day, knowing it would be weeks before they might receive a reply. The waiting was difficult, but it gave them time to prepare, both practically and emotionally. Abigail began to look at their small cabin with new eyes, considering what changes might be needed to welcome a child. The second bedroom, which they had begun preparing as a nursery before their last loss, remained untouched, the tiny cradle Adam had carved still sitting in the corner, covered with a sheet. One crisp October morning, Abigail stood in the doorway of that room, gathering her courage. It was time to transform it from a shrine to their losses into a place of new beginnings. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside and pulled the sheet from the cradle. The sight of it still brought an ache to her chest, but it was duller now, softened by the hope that had begun to grow within her. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, admiring again the careful craftsmanship of her husband's hands. "This could still be used," she said aloud to herself, "if there's a baby. But what if they welcomed an older child? The room would need a proper bed, not a cradle. And toys, books, perhaps a small desk for schoolwork." The possibilities swirled in her mind as she began to clean the room, opening the windows to let in fresh air and sunlight. By the time Adam returned from checking their small herd of cattle, she had the room emptied and was scrubbing the floorboards. "Abby," he called, finding her on her hands and knees. "What are you doing?" She sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "Getting ready," she said simply. "I thought we might ride into town tomorrow, see if Mr. Peterson has any children's furniture at his store." Adam's expression softened as he looked around the transformed room. "I could build a bed," he offered, "and maybe a chest for clothes and toys." "I'd like that," Abigail said, rising to her feet. "We don't know yet who might come to us, but I want to be prepared for any possibility." As the weeks passed, they threw themselves into preparations. Adam built a sturdy bed frame that could serve a child of almost any age, while Abigail sewed new curtains for the windows and a colorful quilt for the bed. They purchased a small bookshelf from Mr. Peterson's store and filled it with the few children's books they could find, promising each other they would add to the collection over time. The first snow fell in early November, dusting the prairie with white and reminding them that they were now committed to waiting until spring before they could journey to Denver. Still, they continued their preparations, finding comfort in the tangible actions that represented their hope. It was nearly Christmas when a letter finally arrived from St. Mary's Home for Children. Adam collected it from the post office during a trip to town for supplies and brought it home to Abigail, both of them too nervous to open it immediately. They sat together at their kitchen table, the letter between them, as the wind howled outside and snow tapped against the windows. "Whatever it says," Adam said, reaching for her hand, "we'll face it together." Abigail nodded, her throat too tight for words. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Turner," she read aloud, "thank you for your letter expressing interest in providing a home for a child from St. Mary's. Your candor regarding your losses and your desire to offer a loving family to a child in need is commendable." She paused, taking a steadying breath before continuing. "We currently have several children who are in particular need of a stable home. Among them are a brother and sister, ages 8 and 5, whose parents perished in a mining accident last year. The boy, Matthew, is bright and helpful but struggles with the loss of his parents and the responsibility he feels for his younger sister, Lucy, who is sweet-natured but shy." Abigail's voice faltered as she imagined these two children clinging to each other in a strange place, missing their parents. There is also a 10-month-old baby boy whose mother died in childbirth and whose father was unable to care for him alone. The father reluctantly placed him in our care but has since disappeared, leaving the child, Thomas, without any family connections. Adam squeezed her hand, his expression unreadable. "Is there more?" Abigail nodded and continued reading. "We understand that you cannot travel until spring, which gives us time to correspond further and determine if one of these children, or perhaps others, who may come into our care in the meantime, might be a good match for your family. I encourage you to discuss prayerfully what age child or children you feel best suited to parent, and whether you have a particular interest in any of the children I've mentioned." "The letter is signed Sister Margaret, Mother Superior," Abigail finished, looking up at Adam with wide eyes. "3 children," Adam said softly, "3 very different situations." Abigail felt overwhelmed by the reality of the choices before them. These weren't abstract ideas anymore, but real children with names and histories and needs. "The baby would be easiest in some ways," she said hesitantly. "We've prepared for a baby so many times, but those siblings, they need to stay together," Adam said firmly. "No question about that." Abigail nodded in agreement. "But are we equipped to take in 2 children at once, especially older ones who remember their parents?" She bit her lip, uncertain. And yet, the thought of separating them is unbearable. They discussed the possibilities late into the night, weighing the challenges and rewards of each situation, trying to imagine how their lives might change depending on which child or children joined their family. In the end, they decided to write back to Sister Margaret, explaining that they were open to considering either the siblings or the baby, and requesting more information about both situations to help them make their decision. "We should also be honest about our circumstances," Abigail said as Adam drafted the letter. We live remotely. The nearest town is 10 miles away and the school is there. We'd need to either arrange transportation or teach the older children at home, at least initially. Adam nodded, adding this information to their letter. We should mention our resources to the livestock, our garden, the fact that we own our land outright. They need to know we can provide materially as well as emotionally. They sent the letter the next day, beginning another period of anxious waiting. Winter settled in earnest over the prairie, bringing bitterly cold days and long nights. Adam worked tirelessly to keep their livestock fed and healthy, while Abigail maintained their home and continued preparing for the possibility of children. She found herself studying her reflection in the mirror more often, noticing the fine lines that had begun to form around her eyes and the streaks of silver appearing in her auburn hair. At 30, she was hardly old, but the years of hard work and heartbreak had left their mark. Would a child, especially an older one who remembered another mother, find her wanting, "You're brooding again," Adam said one evening, catching her staring into the mirror. He came to stand behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "I'm wondering if I'm too old to be starting a family now," she admitted. "Especially if we take in the older children. I'll be 43 by the time the boy is 18, Adam chuckled softly, and I'll be 45. Hardly ancient, Abby." She turned to face him, taking in the weathered face that was still handsome despite the years and hardships. "I just want to be enough for them, whoever they are." "You will be," he said simply, with such conviction that she almost believed him. Christmas came and went quietly, as it always did on the frontier. They exchanged modest gifts, a new hunting knife for Adam, a beautiful shawl for Abigail, and attended the Christmas service in town. But their thoughts were increasingly occupied with the children in Denver and what the coming spring might bring. January brought the harshest weather they'd seen in years, with temperatures dropping so low that it was dangerous to be outside for more than a few minutes at a time. They lost 2 cattle to the cold despite Adam's best efforts, and for several days they were completely snowed in, unable even to reach their barn until Adam dug a path through drifts higher than his head. It was during this bitter cold spell that their second letter from St. Mary's arrived, brought by a determined mail carrier who risked the dangerous conditions to complete his route. Abigail's hands shook as she opened the envelope, both from cold and anticipation. Inside was a lengthy letter from Sister Margaret, providing more details about both the siblings and the baby boy. There was also something else, a small, somewhat blurry photograph showing 2 solemn-faced children standing side by side, the boy with his arm protectively around his younger sister's shoulders. "Matthew and Lucy," Abigail whispered, tracing their faces with her fingertip. The boy was thin and serious-looking, with dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for his young face. The girl was small for her age, with lighter hair pulled back in braids and a hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They look like good kids," Adam said, studying the photograph over her shoulder. "Bit sad, but that's to be expected." According to Sister Margaret's letter, Matthew was doing well in his studies but had become increasingly withdrawn in recent months. Lucy was struggling more visibly, often crying for her mother at night and having difficulty connecting with the sisters who cared for her. Both children had been at St. Mary's for nearly a year, and while there had been a few inquiries about Lucy from couples wanting to adopt a young girl, no one had expressed interest in taking both children. "They're being overlooked because they come as a pair," Abigail said, her heart aching at the thought. "And because Matthew is older." The letter also included more information about baby Thomas, who was described as healthy and good-natured despite his difficult start in life. Sister Margaret had included a small lock of his fine blonde hair, tied with a blue thread. "He's reaching for toys now and trying to crawl," Abigail read, imagining a chubby-cheeked infant exploring his world. "He smiles readily and seems to have a sunny disposition despite the loss of his mother." The letter concluded with a gentle but direct question. "After prayerful consideration, do you feel called to offer a home to one of these children? If so, which situation do you believe best matches your family's capabilities and desires? Abigail set the letter down, overwhelmed by the weight of the decision before them. Both situations tugged at her heart for different reasons. "What are you thinking?" she asked Adam, who had been unusually quiet as she read the letter. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "I'm thinking about what it would be like to be 8 years old, responsible for a little sister, missing your parents and watching as people consider taking your sister but not you." His words hung in the air between them, and Abigail knew they were both remembering the same thing, Adam's own childhood as the oldest of 5 children, shouldering responsibility from a young age after his father was injured in a farming accident. He had essentially raised his younger siblings while his mother worked to keep food on the table. "You see yourself in him," she said softly. Adam nodded, not denying it. "I know what it's like to grow up too fast." Abigail looked down at the photograph again, seeing the children with new eyes. "They need us," she said simply. "Both of them, are you sure?" Adam asked, studying her face. "The baby might be an easier transition, more like what we've prepared for all these years." Abigail considered this. It was true that a baby would in many ways be simpler, no memories of other parents, no established patterns or traumas to overcome. But as she looked at the photograph of Matthew and Lucy, she felt a certainty growing within her. "The baby will find a home," she said. "He's young and healthy. Someone will fall in love with him, but these two—" She tapped the photograph. "They need to stay together, and they need a home where they'll be equally wanted, where no one is considering taking one but not the other." Adam's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, erasing the worry lines that had been etched there moments before. "So we're decided," Abigail nodded, a sense of rightness settling over her. "We are. We'll write to Sister Margaret tomorrow and tell her we want to offer a home to Matthew and Lucy." That night, as a howling blizzard raged outside, Abigail lay awake long after Adam had fallen asleep, thinking about the 2 children in Denver. Were they warm enough? Were they scared of the storm? Did they lie awake at night missing their parents and wondering if anyone would ever want them both? "I want you," she whispered into the darkness, as if they might somehow hear her across the miles. "We want you, just hold on until spring." The following morning, they wrote their reply to Sister Margaret, expressing their desire to welcome both Matthew and Lucy into their family. They explained that they had prepared a room with a bed large enough for Lucy, and that Adam would build a second bed for Matthew. They asked what else the children might need or want to make the transition easier, and whether there were any special concerns they should be aware of. "We've never been parents before," Abigail wrote honestly, "but we promise to learn and grow alongside Matthew and Lucy. We can offer them a stable home, plenty of food, education, and most importantly, love and acceptance. We will never try to replace their parents in their hearts, but we hope to create a new family together." As winter gradually loosened its grip on the prairie, they received regular letters from Sister Margaret, who seemed pleased with their decision and increasingly confident that they would provide a good home for the siblings. She shared more details about the children, Matthew's interest in drawing and natural skill with animals, Lucy's love of stories and surprising talent for singing. "Matthew asked about your home," Sister Margaret wrote in late February. "I showed him the description you provided and the sketch Mr. Turner included of your cabin and land. He wanted to know if you have horses and whether his sister would have her own bed. I assured him on both counts." The fact that Matthew was asking questions about them gave Abigail hope that the boy was at least open to the possibility of joining their family. Sister Margaret had warned them that he might be resistant at first, protective of his sister, and wary of new attachments after losing his parents. "We must prepare ourselves for a potentially difficult adjustment period," Abigail told Adam as they discussed the situation one evening. "They've lost so much, they may be afraid to trust that we won't disappear too." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need to be patient. Show them through our actions that we're here to stay. And that we want both of them equally," Abigail added. "Especially Matthew, he needs to know he's not just an add-on because of Lucy." As March arrived with its unpredictable weather one day spring-like, the next returning to winter's chill, they began more concrete preparations for the journey to Denver. Adam serviced their wagon thoroughly, checking every board and wheel. Abigail sewed new clothes for the children based on the measurements Sister Margaret had provided, wanting them to have something of their own from the start. They also began to share their plans with neighbors and the few friends they had in the area. Most were supportive, though Abigail detected notes of confusion from some. "Taking in 2 orphans at your age," Mrs. Peterson said when Abigail was in the general store purchasing fabric. "That's ambitious, especially with all you've been through." Abigail straightened her spine, meeting the older woman's gaze directly. "We have love to give and a home to share. Why should our previous sorrows prevent us from offering that to children who need it?" Mrs. Peterson had the grace to look abashed. "Of course, dear. I'm sure you'll make a wonderful mother." Those words, "you'll make a wonderful mother," echoed in Abigail's mind as she rode home, filling her with both hope and trepidation. Could she be the mother these children needed, especially when she had no experience to draw from? She confessed these fears to Adam that evening as they sat by the fire, the wind whistling around the cabin's corners. "I don't know the first thing about being a mother to an 8-year-old boy," she said. "What if I make terrible mistakes? What if they hate it here?" Adam took her hand, his expression serious but gentle. "We will make mistakes, Abby. All parents do, but we'll learn and we'll do our best." He squeezed her fingers. "As for them hating it here, well, that's a risk. But I think children are adaptable, especially when they know they're wanted and loved." His words comforted her somewhat, but the anxieties remained, surfacing in dreams where the children arrived only to disappear again, or where they looked at her with the same accusation she sometimes saw in her own reflection, that her body had failed at the most fundamental task of womanhood. April brought the first real signs of spring crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, birds returning from their winter migrations, the land slowly greening after months of white and brown. The mountain passes would soon be clear enough for travel, and Adam began making final preparations for their journey. They received one last letter from Sister Margaret before departing, confirming that Matthew and Lucy were prepared for their arrival and understood they would be returning to Montana with Adam and Abigail. "Lucy is excited, though she has many questions," the nun wrote. "Matthew is more reserved, but he has been helping his sister pack their few belongings and has asked several times when exactly you will arrive. I believe he is both nervous and hopeful." Abigail folded the letter carefully, tucking it into the wooden box where she kept all their correspondence about the children. Soon, the letters would be replaced by real voices, real faces, a real family taking shape under their roof. They planned to depart on April 20th, estimating that the journey to Denver would take approximately 2 weeks, depending on weather and trail conditions. They would stay in Denver for several days to allow the children time to adjust to them before beginning the journey home. The night before their departure, Abigail found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with last-minute worries and preparations. Had they packed enough food for the journey? Would the children be comfortable in the wagon for so many days? Had they brought sufficient gifts to ease the transition? She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Adam, and walked through their small cabin, checking and rechecking their preparations. The second bedroom was ready, with 2 beds now instead of 1, each with a colorful quilt and a small stuffed animal Abigail had sewn. A bookshelf held the children's books they'd collected, and a chest contained the new clothes they'd made. On the kitchen table sat 2 small packages, gifts for the children when they first met. For Matthew, a set of drawing pencils and a leather-bound sketchbook Adam had purchased in town. For Lucy, a rag doll with yellow yarn hair and a dress made from the same fabric as the curtains in her new room, creating a connection to the home she had yet to see. Standing in the quiet cabin, illuminated only by moonlight streaming through the windows, Abigail allowed herself to imagine their return journey, the wagon not just carrying supplies but 2 children, the cabin echoing with young voices, the empty chairs at their table finally filled. "Please," she whispered to whoever might be listening, "let them feel welcome here. Let this become a home for all of us." When she finally returned to bed, Adam stirred and reached for her, pulling her close against the chill of the spring night. "Everything ready," he murmured sleepily. "As ready as it can be," she replied, settling against his warmth. "The rest will be up to us all working together." They set out at dawn the next morning, the wagon loaded with supplies for their journey and space prepared for the children's return trip. Their nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, had agreed to check on their livestock during their absence, and Reverend Porter had promised to include them in the congregation's prayers. The journey to Denver was long but largely uneventful, the spring weather holding fair for most of their travels. They passed through small settlements and crossed vast stretches of open country, camping beside rivers and beneath the shelter of cottonwood groves. Each night, Abigail marked their progress on the map they'd brought, counting down the miles and days until they would reach Denver and meet the children who might become their family. As they approached the growing city, nestled at the base of the towering Rocky Mountains, Abigail felt her nervousness intensify. What if the children didn't like them? What if they changed their minds about wanting to provide a home? What if Matthew and Lucy had decided they preferred to stay at the orphanage rather than journey to a remote cabin with strangers? "You're thinking too much again," Adam said, noticing her pensive expression as they made camp on their final night before reaching Denver. "Everything will work out as it's meant to." "How can you be so calm?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Aren't you nervous at all?" He poked at the campfire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkening sky. "Of course I am, but being nervous won't change what happens tomorrow. All we can do is offer them a home in our hearts and hope they're willing to accept both." They arrived in Denver shortly before noon the following day, the bustling city a sharp contrast to the quiet of their homestead. Abigail felt overwhelmed by the noise and activity, wagons and carriages crowding the streets, people hurrying in all directions. The constant din of commerce and conversation sent. Mary's home for children was located on the outskirts of the city, a large brick building surrounded by a wrought iron fence. As they approached the gates, Abigail's heart pounded so loudly she was certain Adam must hear it. "Ready?" he asked, helping her down from the wagon. She smoothed her best dress, suddenly conscious of how plain and worn it must appear compared to the city fashions they'd passed on their way. "As I'll ever be." They were met at the door by a young nun who introduced herself as Sister Catherine and led them to a small parlor where they were asked to wait. The room was simply furnished but clean and bright, with religious paintings on the walls and a vase of fresh spring flowers on the table. "Mother Superior will be with you shortly," Sister Catherine said with a kind smile before leaving them alone. Abigail perched nervously on the edge of a straight-backed chair, while Adam stood by the window, looking out at the orphanage small garden where several children played under the watchful eye of another nun. "You see them?" Abigail asked, unable to rise and look herself, her legs suddenly feeling too weak to support her. Adam shook his head. "No, just some younger children." The door opened, and they both turned to see an older woman in the black habit of the Sisters of Charity enter the room. She had a kind face lined with age and wisdom, and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take their measure instantly. "Mr. and Mrs. Turner," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I am Sister Margaret. Welcome to St. Mary's." After exchanging pleasantries and discussing their journey, Sister Margaret addressed the question foremost in their minds. "Matthew and Lucy are eager to meet you," she said. "They've been preparing all morning. Lucy has been practicing a song she wants to sing for you and Matthew." She paused, a smile crossing her face. "Matthew has been very busy making sure his sister looks her best. He brushed her hair himself and made sure her collar was straight." The image of the solemn boy from the photograph taking care of his little sister brought tears to Abigail's eyes. "They sound wonderful," she said softly. "They are," Sister Margaret agreed. "They've had a difficult time, but they've shown remarkable resilience." Her expression grew more serious. Matthew may seem standoffish at first. He's protective of Lucy and wary of new attachments. But he's a good boy with a generous heart. We understand, Adam said. We're prepared to be patient. Sister Margaret studied them both for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied by what she saw. I'll bring them in now if you're ready. Abigail took a deep breath, reaching for Adam's hand as Sister Margaret left the room. The few minutes they waited felt like hours, but finally the door opened again, and Sister Margaret returned with 2 children. Matthew was taller than Abigail had expected, thin but sturdy, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and serious brown eyes that took in everything at once. He wore clean but obviously hand-me-down clothes that were slightly too large for his frame. One hand held tightly to his sister's, the other was clenched at his side. Lucy was small for her 5 years, with light brown hair pulled back in neat braids tied with faded blue ribbons. Her eyes were large and the same warm brown as her brother's, though where his were guarded, hers were wide with curiosity and a touch of apprehension. She wore a simple dress that had been patched at the elbows and clutched a small, worn stuffed bear in her free hand. For a moment, no one spoke. Abigail felt frozen, overwhelmed by the reality of these 2 children standing before her after months of letters and preparation. They were real flesh and blood and need and history, not just names on paper or faces in a blurry photograph. It was Adam who broke the silence, stepping forward with a warm smile. Hello, Matthew. Hello, Lucy. I'm Adam Turner, and this is my wife, Abigail. We're very happy to meet you both. Matthew nodded solemnly but didn't speak. Lucy half hid behind her brother, peering out with a mixture of shyness and curiosity. Abigail found her voice at last, kneeling down to be closer to the children's height. We've been looking forward to meeting you for months. Sister Margaret has told us so much about you both. Lucy whispered something to her brother, who bent to listen before straightening up again. Lucy wants to know if you really have horses, he said, his voice quiet but clear. We do, Adam replied, seeming pleased by this opening. We have 2 horses that pull our wagon, and I have a riding horse named Copper. Do you like horses, Matthew? The boy nodded, a flicker of interest crossing his serious face. Our pa used to work with the mine horses. He taught me how to brush them. Well, you can help me with our horses if you'd like, Adam offered. They always appreciate a good brushing. A ghost of a smile touched Matthew's lips before disappearing again behind his careful reserve. Abigail turned her attention to Lucy, who was still partially hidden behind her brother. And I heard you've been practicing a song, Lucy. Would you like to sing it for us? The little girl shook her head, suddenly overcome with shyness, and buried her face against Matthew's side. Maybe later, Abigail said gently, not wanting to pressure her, when you feel more comfortable. Sister Margaret, who had been observing the interaction closely, spoke up. Perhaps we could all sit down together. I've asked Sister Catherine to bring some lemonade and cookies. They arranged themselves around the small table, the children sitting close together on one side while Abigail and Adam took chairs opposite them. Sister Margaret remained standing, a reassuring presence for the children who clearly trusted her. Mrs. Turner Abigail is a wonderful cook, Sister Margaret told the children. And Mr. Turner built their cabin himself. They have a garden and some cattle and plenty of open space to play. Is it far? Matthew asked, his first direct question to them. It's about 2 weeks by wagon from here, Adam explained. We'll take plenty of breaks along the way and camp under the stars at night. Have you ever been camping, Matthew? The boy shook his head. No, sir, but Pa used to tell stories about when he went hunting in the mountains. He said you could see every star in the sky out there. That's true, Adam said. Where we live, the night sky is amazing. You can see the Milky Way stretching all the way across. Lucy tugged on her brother's sleeve, and he bent to listen to her whisper again. Lucy wants to know if there are other children where you live, Matthew reported. Abigail exchanged a quick glance with Adam before answering honestly. Not at our homestead, but there are families with children in Pine Ridge, the nearest town. It's about 10 miles away. We go there for church on Sundays and to buy supplies. She could see Matthew processing this information, likely wondering about friends for his sister and himself. Before he could ask another question, Sister Catherine arrived with a tray of lemonade and cookies, creating a welcome diversion. As they shared the simple refreshments, the atmosphere gradually relaxed. Lucy even ventured a few direct words to Abigail, asking if she had made the cookies. She hadn't, and if she knew how to make gingerbread. She did. Matthew remained more reserved but asked thoughtful questions about the livestock, the weather, and what they would be expected to do at the homestead. "Children your age often help with chores," Adam explained. "Nothing too difficult: collecting eggs, feeding the chickens, helping in the garden. But there's plenty of time for play too." "I help with the little ones here," Matthew said, a note of pride in his voice, "and I can sweep and make beds." "That's wonderful," Abigail said warmly. "You'll be a big help to us, but we want you to have time to be a child too. To explore and play and learn." After about an hour, Sister Margaret suggested that the children return to their regular activities while she spoke privately with the Turners. Matthew seemed reluctant to leave, eyeing them with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, but he dutifully took his sister's hand when the nun beckoned. "We'll see you again tomorrow," Abigail promised. "We've brought something for each of you." This sparked interest in both children, though they tried to hide it. With final shy waves from Lucy and a solemn nod from Matthew, they followed Sister Catherine from the room. When the door closed behind them, Abigail released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They're wonderful," she said, turning to Sister Margaret. "Truly." The nun smiled, taking a seat across from them. "They are indeed. And how do you feel about moving forward with the adoption, even more certain than before?" Adam replied without hesitation. "Matthew is so protective of his sister," Abigail observed. "Has he always been that way, or did it develop after they lost their parents?" "Both, I think," Sister Margaret said thoughtfully. "From what we learned from neighbors, he was always a responsible older brother, but after the accident, that protective instinct intensified. He's essentially been both brother and parent to Lucy for the past year." "That's a heavy burden for an 8-year-old," Adam said quietly. "Indeed," the nun agreed. "That's one reason why finding them a home together has been so important. Matthew needs the chance to be a child again himself, while still maintaining his role as Lucy's big brother." They spoke at length about the children's histories, routines, and needs. Sister Margaret was frank about the challenges they might face: Matthew's occasional nightmares, Lucy's tendency to withdraw when overwhelmed, the possibility of setbacks as the children adjusted to a new home and continued to process their grief. "But they are resilient children," she assured them. "With patience, consistency, and love, I believe they will thrive with you." By the time they left St. Mary's that afternoon, arrangements had been made for them to return the following day to spend more time with the children. If all continued to go well, they would begin the legal process of adoption immediately, with plans to depart for Montana in approximately 1 week. As they found lodging for the night in a modest boarding house, Abigail felt a mixture of elation and terror. The children were real now, not just images in a photograph or descriptions in a letter, but living, breathing souls with hopes and fears and needs of their own. "What if we're not enough for them?" she whispered to Adam as they prepared for bed. "What if we can't heal what's been broken?" Adam pulled her close, his arms steady around her. "We can't heal everything, Abby. No one could, but we can give them safety and stability and love. That's a pretty good start." The following day, they returned to St. Mary's with the gifts they had brought. Matthew's eyes lit up at the sketchbook and pencils, though he quickly masked his excitement behind a polite thank you. Lucy was less restrained, hugging her new doll immediately and declaring that she would name her Abby after her soon-to-be new mother. The innocent comment brought tears to Abigail's eyes, tears she quickly blinked away lest they frighten the child. To be called mother by this sweet girl, even indirectly, awakened feelings so powerful she could barely contain them. They spent the day getting to know each other better, with Sister Margaret's encouragement to take the children for a short walk in the orphanage garden. As they strolled the narrow paths between spring flowers, Lucy gradually warmed up enough to slip her small hand into Abigail's, chattering about the butterflies and the games she liked to play. Matthew remained more guarded, walking slightly ahead with Adam, but occasionally glancing back to ensure his sister was still within sight. When Adam asked questions about his interests or experiences, the boy answered politely but briefly, clearly still assessing these adults who proposed to become his new family. Over the next several days, they established a routine of visiting the orphanage each morning and staying until late afternoon. They shared meals with the children, helped them with their lessons, and slowly began to build trust and familiarity. Lucy blossomed quickly under their attention, singing the song she had practiced and showing off her small accomplishments with pride. Matthew's walls came down more gradually. It was on the third day, as Adam was describing their cattle, that the boy finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Why do you want us?" he asked bluntly, interrupting Adam's explanation of the spring calving. "There are babies here. Most folks want babies." The directness of the question caught them both off guard, but Adam recovered quickly. "We want you both because you belong together and because you deserve a family who will love you just as you are." Matthew looked skeptical. "But why us? Is it because we're older and can work?" Abigail's heart ached at the suspicion in his voice, suspicion no child should have to feel. "No, Matthew," she said gently. "It's because when we read about you and your sister and saw your photograph, something in our hearts said those are our children." The boy studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. "But you don't even know us." "We're getting to know you," Adam pointed out, "and we like what we're learning. You're a responsible big brother, you're thoughtful and smart, and you clearly care deeply for your sister. Those are all qualities we admire." Matthew seemed to consider this. What if we don't fit at your home? What if Lucy cries all the time or I can't do the chores right?" "Then we'll work through it together," Abigail assured him. "A family isn't about being perfect, Matthew. It's about being there for each other through good times and hard times." He didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded slowly before turning his attention back to Lucy, who was showing Adam the cat's cradle she had made with a piece of string. Later that day, when the children were having their afternoon lessons with the other orphans, Sister Margaret shared her observations with Adam and Abigail. "Matthew is beginning to open up to you," she said. "I can see it in the way he watches you both when he thinks no one is looking. There's hope there underneath the caution. He's afraid of being disappointed again," Abigail said, "of losing another family." "Yes," the nun agreed, "and afraid for his sister as well, but the fact that he's asking direct questions about your intentions is actually a positive sign. He's trying to protect himself and Lucy by gathering information." By the end of the week, the legal paperwork had been completed, with Reverend Porter's letter and the Turners' obvious commitment to the children satisfying the minimal requirements of the territorial court. Matthew and Lucy would officially be Adam and Abigail Turner's legal children once the judge signed the final papers the following day. That evening, as they prepared for their final night in Denver before beginning the journey home, Abigail found herself filled with a strange mixture of emotions: excitement at the prospect of finally bringing children home, nervousness about the long journey ahead, and a lingering sadness for all that Matthew and Lucy had lost before coming into their lives. "Do you think they'll ever truly feel like ours?" she asked Adam as they packed their few belongings. He considered the question seriously before answering. "I think they'll feel like themselves, Matthew and Lucy, with their own histories and memories. But also part of our family, connected to us by choice and commitment rather than blood." He paused, looking at her intently. "Does that make sense?" She nodded, understanding what he meant. "It's a different kind of family than we imagined, but no less real for that difference." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a good omen for the start of their journey. They arrived at St. Mary's early, the wagon packed and ready for the long trip home. The children had few possessions: some clothes, a few small toys, and a worn Bible that had belonged to their parents. Everything fit into 2 small cloth bundles that Matthew insisted on carrying himself. The goodbyes were emotional, especially for Lucy, who clung to Sister Catherine with tears streaming down her cheeks. Matthew stood stoically beside his sister, his own eyes suspiciously bright, as the nuns who had cared for them over the past year offered final embraces and words of encouragement. "You will always be in our prayers," Sister Margaret told the children, placing a gentle hand on each of their heads in blessing. "And you are always welcome to write to us. Mrs. Turner has promised to help you with letters." Abigail nodded confirmation, her throat too tight for words. The kindness of these women who had sheltered Matthew and Lucy in their time of need moved her deeply. Finally, it was time to depart. Adam helped the children into the wagon, where Abigail had prepared comfortable seating with blankets and pillows for the long journey. Matthew lifted Lucy up before climbing in himself, still the protective big brother even in this small way. As the wagon pulled away from St. Mary's, the children waved until the building disappeared from view. Lucy's tears gradually subsided as the city gave way to more open country, her natural curiosity engaging with the new sights around them. Matthew remained quiet, watching the landscape change with thoughtful eyes. "It will take us about 2 weeks to reach home," Adam explained as they made camp that first evening. "We'll sleep under the stars most nights unless we pass a town with a boarding house or the weather turns bad." "I can help set up camp," Matthew offered, clearly eager to be useful. "And gather firewood." "That would be a big help," Adam agreed. "We all work together out here." Over the next days, they settled into a rhythm on the trail. Adam drove the wagon and handled the horses, while Abigail prepared meals and tended to the children's needs. Matthew proved to be a willing helper, learning quickly how to assist with the horses and campsite tasks. Lucy gathered wildflowers at each stop, presenting them proudly to Abigail to decorate their simple camps. Slowly, barriers began to fall. Matthew's questions became less about testing their intentions and more about genuine curiosity regarding their home and life in Montana. Lucy began to call them Miss Abigail and Mr. Adam instead of the formal Mrs. Turner and Mr. Turner she had used at the orphanage. One night, about a week into their journey as they sat around the campfire after dinner, Lucy asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Are you going to be our new mama and papa now?" she asked, her small face serious in the firelight. Abigail and Adam exchanged glances before Abigail answered carefully. "We would be honored to be your mama and papa if that's what you would like to call us. But we understand that you had a mama and papa who loved you very much, and we would never try to replace them in your hearts." Lucy considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I think my first mama wouldn't mind if I had a new one too. She always said there can never be too much love." The simple wisdom from the mouth of a 5-year-old brought tears to Abigail's eyes. "Your first mama sounds like she was very wise," she said softly. "She was," Matthew spoke up unexpectedly. "She always knew how to make things better when they went wrong." He looked down at his hands. "I try to remember what she would do when Lucy's sad." "I'm sure you make her very proud," Adam said, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you do." That night, as the children slept nearby in the wagon and Abigail and Adam lay under the stars, Adam reached for her hand. "We're going to be all right," he said quietly, "all 4 of us together." For the first time since they'd begun, this journey, not just the physical journey from Denver, but the emotional one from loss to hope, Abigail truly believed him. The remainder of the trip passed more quickly than expected, with each day bringing them closer not just to their homestead, but to becoming a true family. Matthew began to smile more often, especially when Adam taught him to fish in a stream where they camped for 2 days. Lucy's nightmares, which had plagued her the first few nights, became less frequent as the routine of travel, and the constant presence of her new parents provided security. When at last they crested the final rise and their cabin came into view, Abigail felt her heart swell with a complex emotion, part relief at reaching home safely, part anxiety about this new chapter, and part profound gratitude for the 2 children sitting beside her in the wagon. "Is that it?" Matthew asked, leaning forward to see better. "Is that our home, our home? two simple words that confirmed what Abigail had been hoping to hear, that Matthew was beginning to think of the cabin as his home too. "That's it," Adam confirmed, a smile breaking across his face. "What do you think?" The boy studied the cabin and surrounding land seriously. "It looks good," he said finally, "solid like you built it to last." "I did," Adam said, "for all of us." As they drew closer, details became clearer. The small garden plot Abigail had started before their departure, now showing green shoots, the barn and chicken coop, the wide porch where she had sat with empty arms just months ago, wondering if she would ever hold a child of her own. Now, as Adam helped first Lucy and then Matthew down from the wagon, Abigail realized that her arms would never be empty again. These children, this boy with his serious eyes and protective heart, this girl with her sunshine smile and resilient spirit, they were the family she and Adam had dreamed of, just in a form they hadn't initially imagined. The first days at the homestead were a whirlwind of activity as the children explored their new home and settled into routines. Matthew marveled at Adam's workshop and the tools that filled it, while Lucy delighted in the chickens and the vegetable garden. They exclaimed over the room prepared for them, touching the quilts and books with wondering fingers. "Is this all for us?" Lucy asked, spinning in a circle to take it all in. "All for you," Abigail confirmed, watching the joy on the little girl's face. Though Matthew might want his own room someday when he's older, Adam could build an addition to the cabin. "No," Matthew said quickly. "I want to stay with Lucy, at least for now," he added, trying to sound grown up. "Then that's what we'll do," Adam agreed easily. "This is your home now. We want you to feel comfortable here." There were adjustments, of course. Matthew woke some nights from nightmares about the mining accident that had taken his parents, while Lucy occasionally withdrew into silence when memories overwhelmed her. Abigail and Adam learned to navigate these challenges with patience and understanding, never rushing the children's grief or trying to diminish their loss. As spring turned to summer, the family found their rhythm. Matthew proved to have a natural affinity for animals, just as his father had, and spent hours helping Adam with the horses and cattle. Lucy flourished in the garden alongside Abigail, singing as she pulled weeds and watered the growing vegetables. They began to share more family stories, Abigail and Adam speaking of their journey west from Missouri, the children gradually opening up about their life before the orphanage. These exchanges bridged the gap between their separate pasts and their shared present, weaving a new family narrative that honored all their experiences. In July, they made the trip into Pine Ridge for supplies and to attend church, the first time they would be seen as a family by the wider community. Abigail felt a flutter of nervousness as they drove into town, aware of the curious glances and whispers that would greet them. "Remember," she told the children as they approached the church, "people may ask a lot of questions because they're curious about our family. You don't have to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable." Matthew nodded seriously, while Lucy simply reached for Abigail's hand, seemingly unconcerned about potential awkwardness. As expected, their arrival caused a stir among the congregation. Reverend Porter welcomed them warmly, introducing Matthew and Lucy to the assembled church members with genuine enthusiasm. Most people responded with kindness, though Abigail noted a few judgmental looks and hushed comments behind raised hands. "Mrs. Peterson approached them after the service, her earlier skepticism apparently forgotten as she cooed over Lucy's pretty dress, made by Abigail from fabric purchased in Denver, and commented on Matthew's fine, sturdy build, just like his father. "He favors you, Mr. Turner," she said to Adam, either not realizing or deliberately ignoring the fact that the children were adopted. Matthew looked up at Adam uncertainly, clearly confused by the comment. "Matthew has his own fine qualities that come from his birth father," Adam replied smoothly, placing a supportive hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're just blessed that he and Lucy have joined our family." The response seemed to satisfy both Mrs. Peterson and Matthew, who stood a little straighter under Adam's hand. On the drive home, Lucy fell asleep in the wagon, worn out from the excitement of the day. Matthew, however, remained awake, unusually quiet even for him. "What's on your mind, son?" Adam asked after several miles of silence. The boy hesitated before answering. "That lady said I look like you, but I don't. I look like my pa." "You do," Adam agreed. "From the photograph Sister Margaret showed us, you have his eyes and his strong jaw." "Then why did she say that?" Adam considered his response carefully. "Some people think families should all look alike. They don't understand that families can be made in different ways." Matthew digested this. Are you sad that we don't look like you?" The question caught Adam by surprise. "Not at all," he said firmly. "I'm proud that you look like your birth father. He must have been a fine man to have such a fine son." This seemed to reassure Matthew, who nodded and fell silent again, though the tension had left his shoulders. Later that evening, as Abigail tucked the children into bed, Lucy asked sleepily, "Are we a real family now?" "We are absolutely a real family," Abigail assured her, smoothing the little girl's hair back from her forehead. "Families are made by love, and there's plenty of that in this house." From his bed across the room, Matthew spoke up. "My teacher at the orphanage said there are all kinds of families, some by blood and some by choice." "That's very true," Abigail agreed, "and we chose each other, didn't we?" Both children nodded, Lucy already drifting towards sleep, Matthew watching Abigail with those thoughtful eyes that seemed to see more than a child his age should. "Good night, Mama," he said softly, testing the word for the first time. Abigail's heart swelled almost painfully in her chest. "Good night, my Matthew," she whispered, bending to kiss his forehead. "Sleep well." As summer progressed into autumn, the bonds between them strengthened further. They celebrated Lucy's 6th birthday with a special cake and a new pair of boots for the coming winter. Matthew began his education at home with Abigail, who had been a teacher briefly before marrying Adam. The boy proved to be a quick study, particularly in mathematics and natural sciences. One cool September evening, as the first hints of fall colored the prairie grasses gold and amber, Abigail sat on the porch watching Adam teach Matthew how to whittle a small piece of pine wood. Lucy was inside, already asleep after an active day helping prepare food for the coming winter. As twilight deepened into darkness, Matthew completed his simple carving a small, somewhat lopsided horse and presented it proudly to Abigail. "It's for you, Mama," he said, the term now coming naturally to his lips after several weeks of use. "To remember when we first came home." Abigail accepted the gift with genuine delight, turning the rough carving in her hands. "It's wonderful, Matthew, thank you, I'll keep it always." The boy beamed at her praise before yawning widely. "Time for bed, I think," Adam said, ruffling Matthew's dark hair. "You worked hard today." After Matthew had gone inside to prepare for bed, Adam settled beside Abigail on the porch bench, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. "Happy?" he asked simply. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the wooden horse clutched in her hands. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "They're amazing children, Adam. Sometimes I can hardly believe they're ours." "They were always meant to be," he said with certainty, "just not in the way we originally thought." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie and the occasional creak from the cabin as it settled. "Do you ever think about?" Abigail began hesitantly, "About trying for another baby, a birth child." Adam turned to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light from the cabin windows. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I'm also content with our family as it is. What about you?" She considered the question carefully. "I think I would welcome another child if it happened, but I'm no longer desperate for it. Matthew and Lucy have filled a space in my heart that I thought could only be filled by a child of my body." She smiled softly. "I was wrong about that." Adam nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "Whatever happens, happens," he said simply. "We'll face it together as a family." As autumn deepened toward winter, the family settled into cozy evenings by the fire, with Adam reading aloud from books while Abigail sewed or mended and the children listened, wide-eyed, to tales of adventure and discovery. Matthew continued to progress in his studies. while Lucy began to learn her letters and numbers, eager to keep up with her brother. The first snow came in early November, transforming the prairie into a glistening white expanse that delighted the children, who had never experienced such wide open spaces covered in snow. They built snowmen and had snowball fights, their laughter carrying across the frozen landscape as Adam and Abigail watched from the porch, hearts full. "This is what I always imagined," Adam said softly, pulling Abigail close against the cold. "Children playing in the snow, a warm home waiting, you beside me." "Me too," she agreed, though the vision had once included children with Adam's blue eyes or her auburn hair. Now it featured Matthew's thoughtful expression and Lucy's exuberant spirit, equally beloved but different from what they had initially dreamed. As Christmas approached, the children grew excited about celebrating in their new home. They helped Abigail bake cookies, and Adam cut a small pine tree from the forested area beyond their grazing land. Together, they decorated it with simple ornaments made from pine cones, dried berries, and scraps of colorful fabric. On Christmas Eve, after the children had hung their stockings and gone to bed with whispered excitement, Adam presented Abigail with a small wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "I thought we agreed to focus on gifts for the children this year." "This one couldn't wait," he said, an unusual nervousness in his voice. She unwrapped the package to find a hinged wooden frame beautifully carved by Adam's skilled hands. Inside were two photographs, one of Matthew and Lucy taken in Denver just before they left, and beside it, a photograph of the 4 tiny crosses behind their cabin, a visual remembrance of the children they had lost. "So we never forget any of our children," Adam explained softly. "The ones who left too soon and the ones who found their way to us through a different path." Tears filled Abigail's eyes as she traced the faces in the photograph, then the image of the crosses. "It's perfect," she whispered, "our whole family together." Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, the children waking early to discover stockings filled with candies, oranges, and small handmade toys. There were new mittens knitted by Abigail, a small toolbox made by Adam for Matthew, and a dollhouse fashioned from wooden crates for Lucy. Simple gifts, but received with genuine delight by children who had expected far less. As they sat down to Christmas dinner that afternoon, Abigail looked around the table at the faces of her family. Adam's strong features softened by happiness, Matthew's serious expression giving way to a smile as Lucy told a funny story, the little girl herself practically bouncing with excitement over the day's festivities. This was what they had dreamed of for so long, a family gathered around their table, a home filled with love and laughter. That evening, after the excitement of the day had finally worn the children out and they slept deeply in their room, Abigail and Adam returned to the porch despite the cold. The moon was full, casting blue-white light across the snowy landscape, making it sparkle like diamond dust. "Remember when we sat here last spring?" Adam asked, his breath visible in the freezing air, "when you were wondering if we would ever have a family?" Abigail nodded, thinking back to that day when she had sat with empty arms, her heart heavy with loss and longing. "I never imagined then that by Christmas we would have 2 beautiful children sleeping under our roof. When I told you I still saw the family we dreamed of, this is what I meant," Adam said, gesturing toward the cabin where their children slept. "Not exactly as we first pictured it, but perfect in its own way." Abigail leaned against him, grateful for his strength and vision when her own had faltered. "You were right," she admitted, "though I couldn't see it then." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Montana sky, the same stars that had witnessed their journey from grief to joy, from emptiness to abundance. "Merry Christmas, Abby," Adam whispered, wrapping his arms around her. "Merry Christmas," she replied, her heart full of gratitude for the family they had found, not in the way they had expected, but perhaps in exactly the way they needed. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the stove, warming the rooms where their children dreamed. Outside, the winter wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the promise of seasons to come, springs and summers and autumns and winters they would face together, as the family they had always dreamed of becoming. And Abigail, who had once sat on this porch with empty arms, now knew that her arms and heart would never be empty again.